Mr. Clark. I'd like you to give some assessment of how our military policy is going and our foreign policy is going with respect to Central Asia and the Middle East with respect to securing oil long term. It seems that that whole area is beginning to move toward consolidation with Russia, China, and India, and moving that, and long-term plans are beginning to move that oil eastward rather than long-term toward us. If you give some assessment as where you think we are with that. Thank you.
Well, that's a big question. I think I'm going to have to leave that to actual Michael Clare, who speaks this afternoon, to really give it an honest 30 or 40 minutes that it deserves. I will simply say that I didn't really get to talk about it in my presentation, but I do think there's sort of a new Cold War taking place regarding Russia and the United States because of those very issues regarding the energy resources of the Caspian states and how the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, or SCO, is really sort of shaping up to be an energy superstate or a conglomerate of superstates. And or I guess 2 weeks ago, October 14th, I read just recently that Russia, the gigantic Shakhtom, I think, I can't pronounce it correctly, the oil field, that there's some controversy, or a gas field controversy regarding, Gazprom, which is Russia's largest gas company in the world, recently made a decision that gas would not flow to the United States, it would flow to Western Europe. So it just, in a nutshell, it seems that Russia is trying to use its strategic energy reserves to enhance its formerly strategic power and sort of join forces with Europe or have them dependent on them for imports. And so I think that the United States is really in a bind about this, and I'm sure that Dr. Clare, when he speaks this afternoon, will really give that whole topic the attention that it really deserves, because I think I could spend 30 minutes about it, but it's not fair to everyone else. But thank you for the question.
Roger, in your model, did you consider or look at the impact of electric transportation, including railways, subways that can be easily electrified, as well as electric vehicles? And also, did you consider the possibility of hydrogen that's produced from non-hydrocarbon sources like water?
We have not yet looked at electrification issue. We are in the process of looking at electric vehicles and hybrids, and we have not looked at hydrogen.
My question is, in your models, did you assume current trends for VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and ownership of vehicles by families, et cetera, or did you make any changes in future trends as part of your assumptions for the base case?
No, we used current and forecast trends from the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation, sort of a business as usual scenario.
One thing for you, Roger. Obviously, there's two sides of the equation. There's the supply side and the demand side. And when you reduce the demand side, you reduce the supply, you reduce the need for the demand side, or the demand side is reduced. So the real question is not demand destruction, it's really demand reduction. So I'm suggesting that perhaps that's needed to be looked at more carefully, demand reduction rather than demand destruction. And by the way, fuel economy is not the way to go about it, in my opinion. We should be talking about petroleum displacement, and that's different than fuel economy.
Well, as I try to point out, that getting at demand reduction or demand destruction through demand reduction, if it's phased in over a long period of time, you have some sort of intelligent plan to do it. It's much better than waiting till the bottom falls.
Sure.
Falls out. But let me mention one thing. Last week, as most of you know, the U.S. population reached 300 million. Within 35 years, it'll reach 400 million. Are we talking about reducing demand per capita on average in total, or what? There's a huge challenge we face, especially on the demand side. These additional 100 million people are going to want their automobiles, their plasma TVs, their McMansions, and so forth.
Our military affairs editor, former Special Forces Master Sergeant Stan Goff, has kind of an internal debate going on between Mike Rupert and him regarding currencies and the petrodollar and such. He strongly feels that Russia bringing the ruble into the game is the checkmate in this game, primarily because of the nuclear arsenal that Russia has and their oil reserves. He thinks that the euro is very weak, but Russia, with their recent announcement, has really upped the ante. He has called it a checkmate.
Your question?
Before to me. I'd like your opinion on that.
I guess the short answer is I suspect that Vladimir Putin is a pretty good chess player. You know, he wrote a dissertation in the late 1990s called Towards a New Russian Multinational Oil Company, and he's essentially implementing his dissertation. And because this, Russia is now the largest oil, you know, this sort of goes back and forth between Saudi Arabia and Russia, he thinks, or must think, that this is a strategic moment in time that Russia can implement their own petrocurrency, the petro ruble, as you've noted, and that this will be, and this will work for them. Whether, you know, he moves towards a basket of currencies in which the euro and the ruble, or if the Iranian borders open, so people want to, Western Europe want to purchase their oil trade through the RTS, which is Russia's trading system, or through the Iranian borders is a guess. I mean, and who knows what will happen, but I do think that we are inevitably heading towards a multipolar world order, and it's over energy and currency, and I do think that Putin's positioning of Gazprom and this RTS and the petro ruble will facilitate those trends so it becomes inevitable.
You assert that the mechanisms don't exist for decisions to be made fast enough to avert a crisis and meeting our energy needs. Why won't the energy's futures market be the necessary tool to allow businesses to make these decisions?
Because futures markets, if you look at them, they're very shallow, or the long-term contracts are not really traded very heavily. So most future contracts are only for a year in advance, 2 years in advance, and as Roger pointed out, most of these things have a 10 and 15-year planning horizon. So if you're not sure of the price in 15 years, or you're not sure of the demand in 15 years, the asymmetry is to make sure you're late rather than early. You can't hedge 15 years in the future.
In your study of this, have you really nailed down what is the price elasticity of demand? I think your one slide kind of implied a negative 0.3 or thereabouts. I've seen all kinds of numbers, and most of them haven't proven out. Last year, we had an economist who said $60 a barrel oil would flatten oil demand, and there'd be no increases at that price because of substitution. Hasn't happened. What's your opinion on price elasticity of demand?
I would guess the price elasticity of demand is negative 0.1 to negative 0.3 in the long term. And, you know, it's not going to flatten demand, but depending upon what your demand structure looks like, you can, as the U.S. did, eliminate oil use for electrical generation, and that did eliminate a big chunk of demand.
Roger, your first of 3 recommendations was related to fuel efficiency and I suppose CAFE standards. Given the decreasing competitiveness and deteriorating financial condition of the U.S. auto industry, do the costs associated with increasing fuel efficiency standards really make sense from a regulatory point of view?
I think the answer is yes. We met with representatives from GM, the United Auto Workers, many times over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years. They're adamantly opposed to increasing the standards because it would hurt business. Well, what's happened in the meantime? I think they've been better off if they had produced more energy efficient vehicles. It'd be a much better competitive situation today.
Have you looked at the costs associated with it for the U.S. auto producers?
Yes, we have in depth.